The alarm never
We need
went
to
off,
talk
or
about
maybe
this.
it did.
I don't
and
know if
Thatcher
I
Morrison
can.
had been awake
Please,
since 4
just
anyway,
listen.
Too hard.
listening to his daughter
This'll
cough
just
in
take
the
a
next
second,
room.
sweetie.
Okay,
That
Daddy,
wet,
it's
rattling
working.
sound that sent him
Almost
straight
done.
back to hospital corridors.
We
and
must
the smell of
accelerate the rollout. The
antiseptic
market won't
and the
wait.
feeling
Agreed,
of
the projection
Margot's
supported.
hand growing
Good,
cold
let's commit
in
to Q2.
his.
Let's review
He'd
the
gotten
risks.
up at 5.
We have to
made
move
chamomile
now.
tea with honey
It's
that
too
Bryn
risky. The
refused
board
to
won't
drink,
agree.
Convinced
Leave them
her
to me.
take her
All right,
medicine.
do it.
Then discovered
wonderful
the washing
evening.
machine had
And
flooded
great
overnight,
company.
Indeed.
leaving her
Shall we see the
favorite
new
dress.
exhibit?
I'd love that.
The purple one with the flowers that she insisted made her look like a fairy princess, soaked and unwearable. Bryn stood in the kitchen doorway, 6 years old, with Margot's green eyes and his own stubborn jawline, surveying the disaster with the kind of certainty that brooked no argument. "Daddy, I need the purple dress. It's picture day." Of course it was picture day. Thatcher had completely forgotten, which made him feel like the kind of father he'd sworn he'd never become. The distracted kind, the absent kind, the kind who let work consume everything until there was nothing left for the people who actually mattered. "Sweetheart, the purple dress is wet. What about the yellow one? You love the yellow one. The yellow one is for babies." Bryn's lower lip started to tremble, and Thatcher felt that familiar panic rising in his chest. The knowledge that he was failing at this, that he'd always be failing at this. That no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't be both parents at once. In the end, he blow-dried the purple dress while Bryn ate cereal, then realized he'd forgotten to pack her lunch, then burned his hand on the iron while pressing the dress. Then discovered they were out of bandages because he'd forgotten to restock the first aid kit. By the time they made it to the car, they were already 20 minutes behind schedule, and Bryn was crying because her hair wasn't right, and Thatcher couldn't do braids the way Mommy used to do them. "It's okay, baby girl. It's going to be okay." But he wasn't sure he believed it anymore. The drive to Bryn's school was tense and silent except for her occasional sniffles. Thatcher gripped the steering wheel too tight, his knuckles white, mentally rehearsing the presentation he was supposed to give to the board of directors at 10. Aldridge Global's quarterly review, millions of dollars in projections. His direct supervisor, Garrett Sullivan, had spent 3 weeks preparing him for this moment, coaching him through every slide, every potential question, every political landmine hidden in the data. "You've got this, Morrison. Just don't screw it up. Hayes doesn't forgive mistakes." Callaway Hayes, the CEO, the woman whose reputation preceded her like winter frost. Beautiful, brilliant, absolutely ruthless. Thatcher had seen her exactly 4 times in the 2 years he'd worked at Aldridge Global. Twice in the elevator where she hadn't acknowledged his existence. Once at the annual company meeting where she'd delivered a speech about efficiency and accountability that left 3 department heads unemployed by the end of the week. And once in the parking garage where he'd held the door for her and received nothing in return except a brief assessing glance that made him feel like an insect under glass. She was known for her impossible standards, her zero-tolerance policy for incompetence, and her complete lack of interest in the personal lives of her employees. She worked 16-hour days, never took vacations, and expected everyone else to demonstrate the same level of dedication. Under her leadership, Aldridge Global had tripled its market value, expanded into 6 new countries, and developed a reputation for being one of the most demanding places to work in the entire industry. People didn't cross Callaway Hayes. They didn't disappoint her. And they certainly didn't intrude on her privacy. Thatcher dropped Bryn off at school with a kiss on her forehead and a promise to be there for her recital next week. A promise he wasn't sure he could keep given the workload Garrett had been piling on him, and then drove to the office in a fog of exhaustion and anxiety. His burned hand hurt. His head hurt. His entire body felt like it was held together with coffee and determination and the fading memory of what it felt like to actually sleep through the night. The Aldridge Global building rose 43 stories into the Chicago skyline, all glass and steel and corporate ambition. Thatcher parked in his assigned spot in the underground garage, gathered his laptop and presentation materials, and took the elevator to the 37th floor where the finance department occupied a vast open-plan workspace that somehow managed to feel both crowded and impersonal. Garrett materialized beside his desk before Thatcher had even set down his bag. "Morrison, there you are. Where the hell have you been? The presentation starts in 90 minutes. I know, I'm ready. You look like death. Did you even sleep?" "I'm fine." "You can't be fine. This is the board. Hayes will be there. If you screw this up, I won't screw it up. Thatcher turned on his computer, willing his hands to stay steady. I've been over it 100 times. I know every number, every projection, every contingency plan. Garrett didn't look convinced, but he nodded slowly. Okay. Just remember what we talked about. Keep it tight. Keep it confident. And for the love of everything, don't ramble. Hayes hates rambling. She hates excuses. If she asks you a question, answer it directly and move on. Don't try to impress her. Don't try to explain yourself. Just give her what she needs and get out. Got it. Thatcher's stomach twisted again. He wondered if he should eat something, then decided against it. Food felt impossible right now. The next hour passed in a blur of final preparations and mounting dread. Thatcher reviewed his slides, checked his numbers, rehearsed his opening statement in his head while people around him took phone calls and complained about traffic and planned their lunches like this was just another ordinary Tuesday. He envied them, their normalcy, their ability to care about mundane things, their lives that apparently didn't feel like they were constantly one mistake away from collapse. At 9:45, Garrett appeared again. Time to go. Conference room A. You've got your materials. Yes. You've got your confidence. Working on it. They took the elevator to the 42nd floor executive territory where the carpets were thicker and the silence was heavier and everything smelled faintly of expensive cologne and ambition. The conference room was already filling up with board members, senior executives, people whose annual salaries could have funded Thatcher's entire life 3 times over. He took his position at the front of the room, connected his laptop to the projection system, and tried to remember how to breathe. At exactly 10 o'clock, Calloway Hayes walked in. The room didn't exactly fall silent. It was already fairly quiet, but something changed in the air. Some subtle shift in pressure that made everyone sit up straighter and stop their side conversations. She moved with the kind of precision that suggested every gesture was calculated, every step measured. Her suit was charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, paired with a crisp white blouse and heels that added 3 inches to her already imposing height. Her dark hair was pulled back in a flawless twist. Her face was striking rather than conventionally beautiful, strong jawline, sharp cheekbones, eyes that seemed to catalog everything they touched. She took her seat at the head of the table without greeting anyone, opened a leather portfolio, and glanced at Thatcher with the same expression she might give a spreadsheet that didn't balance. "Mr. Morrison, you may begin." Thatcher's mouth went dry. He clicked to the first slide and heard his own voice start talking somehow steady, despite the fact that his heart was trying to escape his chest. He moved through the quarterly revenue analysis, the profit margins, the expense ratios, the projected growth for Q3 and Q4. He answered questions from the CFO about the marketing budget, from the head of operations about supply chain costs, from someone whose name he didn't catch about the international expansion timeline. And through it all, Calloway Hayes watched him with those unreadable eyes, occasionally making notes in her portfolio, never smiling, never frowning, just absorbing information with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had built an empire on the foundation of absolute focus. Thatcher was halfway through the risk assessment slide when his phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. You didn't answer your phone in a board presentation. You didn't even check it. But then it buzzed again and again. 3 calls in rapid succession, which was their emergency code, the signal that something was seriously wrong. His hands started to shake. He forced himself to keep talking, to finish explaining the contingency plans for currency fluctuation and supply disruptions, but his mind was already somewhere else. Bryn's school. Something happened to Bryn. She fell. She's sick. She's hurt. She needs him. And he's stuck in this room talking about profit margins while his daughter, Mr. Morrison. Calloway Hayes's voice cut through his spiraling thoughts like a blade. He looked up to find her staring at him with an expression that might have been concern on someone else, but on her just looked like intensified attention. Yes. You were saying something about the European market. Had he been... Thatcher looked at his slide, at the words that suddenly seemed like they were written in a foreign language. Yes, the European expansion. We've identified 3 key markets where we believe we can achieve significant penetration within the next fiscal year, pending regulatory approval. And his phone buzzed again. This time Calloway's eyes dropped to his pocket, then back to his face. Is that urgent? No. I apologize. If it's urgent, answer it. There was no warmth in her voice, but there was something else. A kind of crisp practicality that suggested she understood the difference between dedication and stupidity. Thatcher hesitated, torn between professionalism and the mounting panic in his chest. It's probably nothing. Mr. Morrison, we'll wait. He pulled out his phone with trembling fingers, saw Bryn's school flashing on the screen, and stepped away from the projection screen to take the call. This is Thatcher Morrison. The voice on the other end was Principal Winters from Riverside Elementary. Mr. Morrison, I'm calling about Bryn. I'm sorry to interrupt your day, but she had a small incident during recess. She fell from the monkey bars and hit her head. The nurse examined her and she seems okay, but we'd like you to come pick her up as a precaution. She's asking for you. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Thatcher ended the call and looked up to find the entire room staring at him. I apologize, I have to go. My daughter, there's been an accident at her school. Garrett looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. Several board members exchanged glances, and Calloway Hayes tilted her head slightly, studying Thatcher with those penetrating eyes. Is she all right? The question caught him off guard. There was no warmth in it, but there was something. Genuine inquiry, maybe, or just efficient information gathering. I think so. They said it was minor, but... Go. Calloway gestured toward the door with one elegant hand. Mr. Sullivan can finish the presentation. Garrett's head snapped around his expression somewhere between shock and resignation. Of course. Yes, absolutely. Thatcher gathered his materials with shaking hands, muttered another apology, and practically fled from the conference room. He was halfway to the elevator when he realized he'd left his laptop connected to the projection system, but there was no time to go back. Bryn needed him. Nothing else mattered. The elevator seemed to take forever. Thatcher jabbed the button for the ground floor repeatedly as if that would make it move faster, his mind conjuring increasingly terrible scenarios. Head injury, concussion, internal bleeding. They said she was fine, but what if they were wrong? What if they'd missed something? What if he got there and found her unconscious? Or worse. He forced himself to breathe. Bryn was okay. The school wouldn't have let him drive if it was serious. They would have called an ambulance. This was precautionary. Just precautionary. The elevator lurched to a stop on the 41st floor. The doors opened to reveal an empty hallway. Executive offices, private bathrooms, the kind of rarefied space where people like Thatcher didn't belong. He jabbed the close button, but the doors didn't respond. The elevator system sometimes did this, stopped at random floors for maintenance or priority override. He hit the button again. Nothing. Come on, come on. His panic was rising now, mixing with the adrenaline and the fear and the desperate need to get to his daughter. He didn't have time for this. Bryn was waiting. She was hurt and scared and asking for him, and he was stuck in an elevator that apparently couldn't understand basic commands. Finally, the doors started to close. But before they could seal completely, Thatcher heard something, a sound that didn't belong in the pristine silence of Executive Row. A gasp, or maybe a sob, something raw and human, and definitely not the kind of sound that came from the untouchable world of corporate leadership. The doors closed. The elevator descended. And Thatcher told himself it was none of his business that he'd imagined it, that he needed to focus on Bryn. But when the elevator reached the ground floor and opened, he found himself frozen in place, that sound echoing in his memory. Someone was in pain. Someone was alone. And even though he had every reason to ignore it, even though his daughter needed him, even though getting involved in anything on the executive floor was career suicide, he couldn't make himself walk away. He pressed the button for the 41st floor. The elevator carried him back up through the building, each floor marked by a soft chime that counted down to what was probably a terrible decision. When the doors opened again, the hallway was still empty, still silent. Thatcher stepped out cautiously, feeling like an intruder in a space that had never been meant for people like him. The sound came again, definitely human, definitely distressed. It was coming from down the hall from the direction of the executive washrooms. Thatcher moved toward it without quite deciding to his feet, carrying him forward while his brain screamed at him to turn around, get back in the elevator, go to his daughter, don't get involved. The door to the executive washroom was slightly ajar. The sound was clearer now, ragged breathing, the kind that came after crying or pain or both. Thatcher raised his hand to knock, to announce himself, to do anything that might preserve some shred of propriety. Instead, the door swung open under the weight of his touch, and he found himself staring directly into Calloway Hayes's private hell. She stood at the marble counter, her back to the mirror, her tailored jacket discarded on the floor. Her white blouse was unbuttoned and pulled aside, revealing a torso that bore the unmistakable evidence of major surgery. Scars that ran in deliberate lines across her chest and abdomen, some old and silver, others still faintly pink with healing. A mastectomy. Clearly. Reconstructive surgery. The kind of medical intervention that spoke to cancer, to survival, to battles fought in absolute privacy. Her face in the mirror was stripped of its usual armor. Pale, vulnerable, tracked with silent tears that she was wiping away with trembling hands. And then she saw him. Their eyes met in the reflection, and Thatcher watched her entire expression transform from raw vulnerability to something arctic and dangerous. "Get out." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the force of absolute authority. Thatcher stumbled backward, his mouth opening to apologize, to explain, to somehow undo what he'd just seen. "I'm sorry. I thought someone was hurt." "Get out." Each word was measured, controlled, the kind of control that came from years of practice at hiding weakness. Calloway was buttoning her blouse with mechanical precision, her fingers somehow steady, despite the fact that her entire carefully constructed privacy had just been shattered. Thatcher fled. He hit the elevator button 6 times, praying it would arrive before she came after him, before security appeared, before whatever consequences this invasion deserved could catch up with him. The doors opened and he threw himself inside, jabbing the ground floor button like it might save his life. The elevator descended, and Thatcher leaned against the wall, his heart hammering his hands, shaking worse than they had during the presentation. What had he done? What had he just done? He'd violated the privacy of the most powerful person in the company. He'd seen something she'd clearly gone to extraordinary lengths to keep secret. He'd witnessed her in a moment of vulnerability that she would never, ever forgive. His career was over, not just at Aldridge Global. Calloway Hayes had connections throughout the industry. One word from her and he'd be unemployable, blacklisted, finished. And Bryn, what would happen to Bryn when he lost his job? How would he pay for her school, her medical care, everything she needed? They were barely making it as it was. Without his salary. His phone rang again. The school. Bryn. Thatcher answered in a daze, heard Principal Winters asking where he was, managed to explain about traffic, even though he hadn't left the building yet. He promised he'd be there soon. Ended the call and walked through the lobby like a ghost. The drive to Riverside Elementary happened in fragments. Red lights, pedestrians, other cars that moved around him like water around a stone. Thatcher's mind kept returning to that moment in the washroom, Calloway Hayes's scarred torso, her tear-stained face, her fury at being seen. He'd never meant to intrude. He genuinely thought someone needed help. But intent didn't matter when you'd witnessed something that powerful people would kill to keep hidden. Bryn was waiting in the nurse's office with a small bandage on her forehead and red-rimmed eyes. The moment she saw him, she burst into fresh tears and launched herself into his arms. "Daddy, I fell and it hurt and I wanted you and you weren't there." "I'm here now, baby girl. I'm here." Thatcher held her tight, breathing in the smell of her strawberry shampoo, feeling her small body shake with sobs. He examined the bandage carefully, listened to the nurse explain about the ice pack and the observation period, and how Bryn had been very brave. And all the while his mind was still in that washroom, replaying Calloway's expression, her words, the terrible understanding that his life as he knew it had just ended. They stopped at the ice cream shop 2 blocks from the school, the one where they'd gone after every difficult doctor's appointment during Margot's illness, where the owner knew their names and always gave Bryn extra sprinkles. Thatcher ordered her a double scoop of strawberry with rainbow sprinkles and got himself black coffee that he didn't drink, just held like an anchor to reality. Bryn chattered about the monkey bars, about how she'd been trying to cross them like her friend Emma, about how she didn't cry until after she fell, because crying was for babies. Thatcher listened and nodded and made appropriate responses while his mind circled back to Calloway Hayes, to the scars, to the fury in her eyes. He'd be fired. Probably by end of day. Security would be waiting at his desk to escort him out. He'd lose his insurance, which meant he'd lose access to Bryn's pediatrician, the one who actually understood her medical history and didn't treat every cough like it might be the beginning of the end. He'd lose the stability he'd fought so hard to build after Margot died. And worse, much worse, Calloway Hayes would never forgive him for seeing her like that, for witnessing the humanity beneath the corporate armor, for being present at a moment when she'd allowed herself to be weak. His phone buzzed. A text from Garrett. "Where are you? Hayes wants to see you now." Thatcher's hands went numb. This was it. The reckoning. He typed back, trying to keep his fingers steady. "Daughter emergency at hospital." It wasn't quite a lie. They were near the hospital even if they weren't in it, and Bryn had hit her head, which was serious enough to justify leaving. Garrett's response came immediately. "She said tonight, 7 p.m., her office. Don't be late." And then after a pause, "Morrison, whatever you did, fix it." Thatcher stared at the message ice forming in his stomach. 7 p.m. meant after hours, when the building would be mostly empty. Private, contained, the kind of meeting where careers ended quietly without witnesses. "Daddy, you're not eating your ice cream." Bryn peered at him with concern that looked too old on her 6-year-old face. "Are you sad?" "No, sweetheart. Just thinking about work." "Work is boring." "Yes, it is. But it pays for ice cream, so we tolerate it." They finished their ice cream, drove home to their small 2-bedroom apartment, and spent the afternoon doing exactly what they should have been doing: coloring, reading stories, building elaborate structures out of blocks that inevitably collapsed into giggles. Thatcher helped Bryn with her homework, made her favorite dinner of chicken nuggets and carrot sticks, and gave her a bath that involved more water on the floor than in the tub. At 6:30, Mrs. Winters from across the hall arrived to watch Bryn. She was a grandmother type who'd taken them under her wing after Margot died, who knew their whole sad story, and never asked uncomfortable questions about why Thatcher sometimes came home looking like he'd been crying. "You work too hard. That girl needs her father home." "I know, I'm trying." "Try harder." But she said it kindly, with a pat on his arm that made Thatcher's throat tight. He kissed Bryn goodnight. She was already half asleep, her bandaged forehead pressed against her favorite stuffed rabbit, and drove back to Aldridge Global through evening traffic that felt like moving through water. The building looked different at night. Its glass facade reflected the city lights like a mirror of ambition and ruthlessness. Most of the windows were dark. Only the upper floors still glowed with life, where people like Calloway Hayes lived their 16-hour days and built empires on the bones of people like Thatcher. Security nodded him through without comment. The elevator carried him to the 43rd floor in silence, counting up toward his professional execution. When the doors opened, he found himself in another world entirely, an expanse of polished hardwood and expensive art, and the kind of furniture that cost more than most people made in a year. Calloway Hayes's office occupied the entire northeast corner. Her assistant's desk sat empty dark. The door to the inner office was closed, but light showed underneath it. Thatcher knocked. His hand didn't shake. He was too far beyond fear for physical symptoms. "Come in." Her voice was flat, giving nothing away. He opened the door and stepped into a space that reflected its occupant with uncomfortable accuracy. Everything was precisely arranged, from the papers on her desk, to the small sculpture on the credenza, to the way the chairs faced each other at exact angles. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a spectacular view of Chicago at night, all lights and movement and life happening somewhere else to someone else. Calloway sat behind her desk, still in her charcoal suit, though she'd loosened it slightly in deference to the hour. Her hair was still pulled back in that perfect twist. Her face was composed, professional, completely unreadable. She didn't invite him to sit. "Mr. Morrison, we need to discuss what happened this afternoon." "I apologize." The words came automatically insufficient. "I didn't mean to intrude. I thought someone needed help. I should have announced myself. I should have—" "Stop." She held up one hand. "I don't want your apologies. I want to understand what you're planning to do with what you saw." Thatcher blinked, confused. The question didn't make sense. What he was planning to do with it nothing. "I'm not planning to do anything." "I find that difficult to believe." Calloway's eyes were cold, analytical. "You witnessed something I've kept private for 3 years. Something that could affect shareholder confidence, board perceptions, market valuation. Information like that has value." The implication hit him like a physical blow. "You think I'm going to sell your medical information, blackmail you? People have done worse for less." She said it without inflection, like she was discussing quarterly projections. "I need to know your price." "I don't have a price." Thatcher's voice cracked. "I don't want anything except to keep my job and take care of my daughter. What I saw today, that's your business, your private medical history. I would never, I'm not—" He stopped, breathing hard, suddenly furious. Not at her exactly, but at the assumption, at the calculation, at the idea that she could be so cold about something so fundamentally human. "My wife died of cancer." The words came out quiet, his anger draining into something bleaker. 3 years ago. Breast cancer. Ovarian cancer. Take your pick, she had both. I spent 18 months watching her fight and lose. And you think I'd use someone else's medical trauma as leverage? You think I'm that kind of person?" Something flickered across Calloway's face, so quickly that Thatcher almost missed it. Not quite surprise, maybe recognition. The expression of someone who'd just had their assumptions challenged and didn't like it. "I didn't know about your wife. That wasn't in your employee file." "Why would it be? It's not relevant to my job performance." "Isn't it?" Calloway leaned back slightly, her posture perfect. "You left a board presentation today because of a family emergency. Your daughter, who you're raising alone." "Yes." "That must be difficult." It wasn't a question, and it wasn't said with any particular sympathy, but coming from Calloway Hayes it felt almost intimate. Thatcher didn't know how to respond, so he just nodded. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the faint hum of the building's ventilation and the distant sound of traffic 43 floors below. Calloway studied him with those penetrating eyes, and Thatcher forced himself not to look away, not to flinch to meet her gaze with something like dignity, even though he was pretty sure he was about to be fired. "Sit down, Mr. Morrison." It wasn't a request. Thatcher sat in one of the precisely angled chairs, his spine straight, his hands folded in his lap like a schoolboy waiting for punishment. Calloway was quiet for a long moment, her fingers drumming once against the desk in the only nervous gesture he'd ever seen her make. When she finally spoke, her voice was different. Not warm exactly, but less armored. "What you saw today, I had a double mastectomy 2 years ago. Preventive. Aggressive intervention based on genetic testing and family history. My mother died of breast cancer. So did my aunt. The odds were not in my favor." Thatcher didn't move, barely breathed. This felt like standing on ice that might crack at any moment. "I chose not to disclose it to the company. Not because I'm ashamed, but because I didn't want it to define me. I didn't want the pity or the speculation about my ability to lead or the whispers about whether I was dying. I wanted to be the CEO, not the CEO with cancer." "That makes sense." Thatcher said it quietly, meaning it. Calloway looked at him sharply. "Does it? Most people would say I should have been transparent, that hiding a major medical event shows weakness or dishonesty or poor judgment. Most people haven't watched someone they love die in public view." The words came out before Thatcher could stop them, raw and honest. "Margot, my wife, she wanted to keep working as long as possible. She was a teacher. She loved her kids. But everyone at her school knew she was sick, and they treated her like she was already gone, like she was fragile, Like her diagnosis was the only thing about her that mattered anymore. It destroyed her almost more than the cancer did. Calloway's expression was unreadable, but she was listening with an intensity that felt almost uncomfortable. "So no, I don't think you should have disclosed it. I think you had every right to fight your battle privately and come out the other side on your own terms. What I saw today, that's yours. It doesn't belong to the company or the board or anyone else." Another silence. Longer this time. Calloway's fingers had stopped drumming. She was looking at him like he was a puzzle she couldn't quite solve, and for the first time since he'd walked into her office, Thatcher felt like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't about to be fired. "You really won't tell anyone?" It still wasn't quite a question, but there was something in it that sounded almost like hope. "I really won't. Even though it would give me leverage. Even though I could probably negotiate a promotion or a raise or anything I wanted. I don't want to be the kind of person who uses someone else's pain as currency." Thatcher met her eyes steadily. "I've had enough pain in my life to know it's not something you weaponize." Calloway nodded slowly, like she was absorbing this information and filing it away for future reference. Then she did something Thatcher never expected. She stood up, moved to the window, and turned her back on him. Not dismissively, but like she needed to look at something other than his face while she spoke. "I was supposed to fire you today. For the intrusion. For the security breach. For making me vulnerable." Thatcher's stomach dropped, but he forced himself to stay quiet. "But I'm not going to. Because you're right, what I saw was yours, and what you choose to do with that knowledge is a test of your character, not mine. And so far you've passed." She turned back to face him, and for just a moment Thatcher saw past the corporate armor to the woman underneath. The one who'd survived cancer alone, who'd chosen secrecy over support, who understood exactly what it cost to rebuild yourself after catastrophic loss. "Your presentation this afternoon was excellent, by the way. Mr. Sullivan finished it adequately, but your analysis of the European markets was particularly insightful. I want you to expand on that for next quarter." "Thank you." Thatcher was still processing the fact that he wasn't fired, that he was apparently being praised instead. "You can go." Calloway returned to her desk, her armor sliding back into place like she'd never removed it. "And Mr. Morrison, your daughter's recital is next week, correct? Tuesday evening." How did she know that? Had she looked into his file, investigated him? Yes. "Make sure you're there. Family obligations are important. They shouldn't be sacrificed for quarterly presentations." Coming from anyone else, it would have sounded like standard corporate platitude. Coming from Calloway Hayes, it sounded like hard-won wisdom delivered at significant personal cost. Thatcher stood, nodded, and walked to the door. He had his hand on the handle when her voice stopped him one more time. "Mr. Morrison." He turned back. Calloway was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Something complicated and human that didn't fit her usual mask. "Thank you for not making me regret trusting you." And Thatcher understood that this wasn't just about the medical privacy, it was about something larger. About two people who'd survived the unsurvivable, who'd learned to hide their scars, who'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen without judgment. "You don't have to thank me. Some things should stay private. Some battles should be fought alone if that's what you choose." Something like respect flickered in her eyes. "Get some rest, Mr. Morrison. You look exhausted." "So do you." It was too familiar, too honest, and for a second Thatcher thought he'd crossed a line, but Calloway just smiled. Barely. Briefly. But it was there. "Fair point. Good night, Mr. Morrison." "Good night, Ms. Hayes." The next morning arrived with the kind of gray, persistent drizzle that made Chicago feel wrapped in wet wool. Thatcher woke to find Bryn already awake, sitting cross-legged on his bed with her stuffed rabbit and a picture book she couldn't quite read yet, but had memorized from countless bedtime readings. "You were snoring, really loud like a bear." "Bears don't snore, baby girl." "How do you know?" "Have you ever heard a bear sleep?" Thatcher pulled her into a hug, breathing in her strawberry shampoo smell, grateful for this moment of normalcy after yesterday's chaos. "Good point. I concede to your superior logic. What's concede mean? It means you win. Bryn grinned triumphant. I always win. They went through their morning routine with less disaster than usual. Bryn's forehead bruise had turned a spectacular purple-green but didn't seem to hurt anymore. Breakfast happened without any spills, and they even made it out the door on time. Thatcher dropped her at school, watched her run toward her friends without looking back, and felt the familiar ache of watching her grow up without Margot there to see it. The drive to Aldridge Global felt different today. Yesterday he'd been dreading termination. Today he was dreading something more complicated facing Callaway Hayes after that strange, raw conversation in her office, after she'd trusted him with her medical history, after he'd trusted her with his. The building looked the same as always, all glass and steel ambition, but Thatcher felt like he was entering it as a different person, someone who'd been given access to a secret that changed everything about how he understood the power structure around him. Garrett ambushed him the moment he stepped off the elevator. What the hell happened last night? He grabbed Thatcher's elbow, steering him toward the break room with the urgency of someone handling classified information. You had a meeting with Hayes, alone, after hours, and you're still employed. She wanted to discuss the presentation. For 2 hours. Garrett's eyes were wide behind his glasses. Morrison people don't have 2-hour meetings with Callaway Hayes and walk away smiling. They have 5-minute meetings and walk away traumatized. I'm not smiling. You're not crying either. You're not packing your desk. You're not being escorted out by security. Garrett lowered his voice to a whisper. What did she want? Thatcher poured himself coffee he didn't want, using the ritual to buy time. What could he say? That he'd accidentally witnessed her medical scars, that she'd accused him of potential blackmail, that they'd somehow ended up sharing their respective traumas, like two people who'd forgotten how to be human and were cautiously remembering. She wanted clarification on the European market analysis, and she told me to prioritize Bryn's recital next week. Garrett stared at him like he'd started speaking Mandarin. Callaway Hayes told you to prioritize family time. Yes. Callaway Hayes, the woman who once fired someone for leaving early for their father's funeral. That's a rumor. It didn't actually happen. The point stands. Garrett shook his head slowly. Something's different. Did you, I don't know, discover she's actually a robot? Is that it? Did you find her charging station? Despite everything? Thatcher laughed. She's not a robot. Could have fooled me. Garrett grabbed his own coffee, still studying Thatcher with suspicious curiosity. Just be careful, okay? Hayes doesn't do personal. She doesn't do friendly. If she's suddenly interested in your family life, there's an angle. There's always an angle. Thatcher thought about Callaway standing at her window admitting she'd almost fired him for witnessing her vulnerability. About the way she'd said thank you like the words hurt coming out. About two broken people who might be figuring out how to heal without having to do it alone. Maybe she's just human. Yeah, and maybe I'm the Pope. Garrett clapped him on the shoulder. Get to work, Morrison. And whatever you did to not get fired, keep doing it. The morning passed in a fog of emails and spreadsheets and conference calls that Thatcher participated in without really being present. His mind kept drifting back to that office, that conversation, the way Callaway's armor had cracked just enough to let him see the person underneath. He wondered if she regretted it this morning, if she'd rebuilt those walls higher and thicker, determined never to be that exposed again. At 11:30 his phone rang. Internal number. Executive floor. Thatcher's stomach clenched as he answered. This is Thatcher Morrison. The voice was crisp, professional, giving nothing away. Mr. Morrison, this is Rachel Kingsley, Ms. Hayes's executive assistant. Ms. Hayes would like to see you in her office at noon. Please bring your European market analysis. The line went dead before Thatcher could respond. Garrett looked up from his own desk, his expression somewhere between sympathy and vindication. See angle, there's always an angle. But when Thatcher arrived at Callaway's office at exactly noon, because being late felt like testing fate, he found something unexpected. She was on the phone, but she gestured him in and pointed to one of the chairs with the kind of casual authority that suggested this wasn't an execution meeting. Her office looked the same as it had last night, except now daylight streamed through those floor-to-ceiling windows, turning Chicago into a sprawl of gray buildings and gray sky. "I understand your concerns, Richard, but the timeline isn't negotiable." Calloway's voice was pure business. No warmth, but no hostility either. "We committed to the Singapore office opening in Q3. If you need additional resources, submit the request through proper channels. I'm not extending deadlines because your team failed to plan adequately." She paused, listening, her expression unchanging. "Then I suggest you find a way to make it work. That's what leadership means." She ended the call without saying goodbye and turned her full attention to Thatcher. "Mr. Morrison, thank you for coming." "Of course." Thatcher set his laptop on her desk, opened the European analysis. "You wanted to discuss the market projections?" "Among other things." Calloway stood, moved to the windows with that same restless energy he'd noticed yesterday. Today she wore navy instead of charcoal. Her hair twisted back with the same precision, but something about her seemed less rigid. Or maybe Thatcher was just imagining it, projecting humanity onto someone who'd spent years perfecting the art of being untouchable. "The European analysis is solid. Your assessment of the German manufacturing sector in particular that showed insight beyond what I'd expect from someone at your level. How did you identify those opportunities?" Thatcher pulled up the relevant slides, fell into the comfortable territory of data and projections. For the next 20 minutes they discussed market gaps, competitor strategies, partnership potential. Calloway asked sharp questions that demonstrated she'd already absorbed every detail of his presentation and was testing whether he truly understood the implications or had just assembled pretty slides. He understood. And more than that, he could articulate why certain approaches would work where others would fail, how timing and positioning could turn moderate opportunities into significant competitive advantages. When he finished, Calloway was quiet for a moment, studying him with an expression that might have been approval. "I want you to develop a full implementation strategy. Timeline, resource allocation, risk assessment, partnership opportunities. Can you have that ready in 2 weeks? 2 weeks, while maintaining his regular workload, while getting Bryn to school and activities, while being both parents at once." Yes, because what else could he say? This was an opportunity, a test, a chance to prove he deserved to be in this building, in this conversation, in Calloway Hayes's line of sight. Good. She returned to her desk, made a note in her leather portfolio. "You'll report directly to me on this project. Weekly updates, Fridays at 4. Can you make that work with your schedule?" Fridays at 4 meant staying late, meant scrambling to arrange childcare for Bryn, meant adding another layer of complication to his already precarious balance. "I can make it work." Calloway studied him for a long moment, like she was reading the calculation behind his answer. "Your daughter's recital is Tuesday evening, correct?" Yes. How did she remember that? Had she made a note, added it to some calendar? What time? 6:30 at Riverside Elementary. Calloway made another note. "You'll need to leave by 5:30 at the latest to make it on time. I'll inform Mr. Sullivan that you're unavailable Tuesday afternoon for any meetings or urgent requests." Thatcher blinked, thrown by this casual rearrangement of his schedule. "That's thank you, but I can manage." "I'm sure you can." Calloway's tone was matter-of-fact, like she was discussing quarterly targets. "But you shouldn't have to. When I tell you family obligations are important, Mr. Morrison, I mean it. Your daughter is 6 years old and she's recovering from a head injury. She needs her father present, not distracted by work anxiety." There was something in the way she said it. Not quite personal, but not purely professional either. Like she was speaking from experience or from regret or from some complicated place that existed between the two. "I appreciate that." Thatcher said it carefully. "It's not always easy to balance." "No, it's not." Calloway folded her hands on her desk, and for just a moment her armor slipped again, showing something vulnerable underneath. "My mother died when I was 7, cancer. My father was a corporate attorney who thought presence meant providing material comfort. He paid for the best schools, the best clothes, the best therapies. But he wasn't at the recitals. He wasn't at the parent-teacher conferences. He wasn't there when I needed him to just be a father instead of a provider." She stopped abruptly like she'd said more than she'd intended. Thatcher watched her rebuild her walls in real time, watched her expression smooth into professional neutrality. The point being, children don't remember the quarterly earnings or the European market strategies. They remember whether you showed up. So show up, Mr. Morrison. I will. I always do. Good. She stood a clear dismissal. I'll expect your first progress update on the European strategy next Friday, 4 p.m. Don't be late. Thatcher gathered his laptop, headed for the door, then paused. Ms. Hayes? Yes. Thank you for understanding about Tuesday. Not everyone would. Calloway's expression softened almost imperceptibly. I know what it costs to choose between career and family. I made that choice poorly for too many years. I'd prefer you didn't repeat my mistakes. She said it simply, without self-pity or drama, but the weight of regret underneath those words was unmistakable. The rest of the week passed in a blur of doubled workload and compressed sleep. Thatcher worked on the European strategy during Bryn's school hours, maintained his regular responsibilities in the gaps between, and somehow managed to keep their small life functioning. Bryn's bruise faded from purple-green to yellow-brown. Mrs. Winters watched her Tuesday and Thursday afternoons while Thatcher worked late. The washing machine flooded again, then mysteriously fixed itself. And on Friday at exactly 4 p.m., Thatcher presented his first progress report to Calloway Hayes. She listened without interrupting her focus, absolute, her questions sharp and probing but never dismissive. When he finished, she approved his approach, suggested 3 modifications that would strengthen the partnership framework, and dismissed him with orders to incorporate those changes by next week. It should have felt like any other business meeting, but something about the way she engaged with his ideas, really listened, really considered, really treated him like his perspective had value, made it feel different, made it feel like he mattered beyond his job title and his quarterly metrics. One more thing, Mr. Morrison. Calloway stopped him as he was leaving. How was your daughter's recital? Thatcher smiled before he could help it. She forgot half her lines and improvised a song about butterflies that had nothing to do with the actual play. She was perfect. Something flickered across Calloway's face. Amusement, maybe, or wistfulness. Sounds like she has her father's creativity. More like her mother's confidence. The words slipped out before Thatcher could censor them, bringing Margot into the space where she didn't belong. But Calloway didn't look uncomfortable. If anything, she looked understanding. Good qualities to inherit. Have a good weekend, Mr. Morrison. You too, Ms. Hayes. She laughed. Actually laughed short and surprised. I'll be here until Sunday evening working on the Asia-Pacific expansion, but I appreciate the sentiment. Thatcher hesitated in the doorway. You know you're allowed to take weekends off, right? Like legally mandated human rest periods. Are you counseling me on work-life balance, Mr. Morrison? Absolutely not. That would be wildly inappropriate. Thatcher held her gaze. I'm just suggesting that the person who told me to show up for my daughter's recital might want to consider showing up for her own life occasionally. He'd crossed a line. He knew it the moment the words left his mouth. Knew it from the way Calloway's expression shifted into something unreadable. For a long second he thought she'd fire him after all, that this fragile understanding they'd built would shatter under the weight of his presumption. But then Calloway smiled, really smiled, small and genuine and almost shy. Point taken. I'll try to leave before midnight on Sunday. Progress. Don't push your luck, Mr. Morrison. But there was no real warning in her voice. Just something that sounded almost like fondness. The weekend passed in the comfortable chaos of single parenthood. Bryn had a sleepover at Emma's house that involved excessive giggling and a midnight phone call from Emma's mother asking if Bryn always told such elaborate stories about fairies. Thatcher caught up on laundry, grocery shopping, and the endless maintenance tasks that kept their small life functioning. He thought about calling his own mother, then didn't, because explaining any of this felt impossible. Monday morning brought rain again and traffic that turned his commute into a test of patience. Thatcher arrived at the office 15 minutes late, coffee-deprived, and already behind schedule, to find Garrett waiting by his desk with an expression Thatcher had learned to dread. Conference Room B. Now. Hayes called an emergency meeting. Thatcher's stomach dropped. What happened? No idea. But she looked pissed, like actually angry instead of just generally terrifying. They joined the stream of senior staff heading toward the conference room, a crowd that included department heads, senior analysts, people whose salaries made Thatcher feel like he was playing at adulthood. He slipped into a seat near the back, trying to be invisible, trying to figure out what crisis could have prompted this gathering. Calloway arrived exactly on time, her expression carved from ice. She didn't sit, didn't waste time on pleasantries, just launched directly into the reason they were all there. This weekend, our confidential bid for the Frankfurt manufacturing contract was leaked to our primary competitor. Her voice was controlled fury, each word precisely measured. They undercut our proposal by exactly 3%, just enough to win the contract without raising suspicion about how they obtained our numbers. This leak cost us a $40 million deal and compromised our entire European expansion strategy. The room went silent. Thatcher felt sick. His European analysis, the one he'd been working on all week, the one that contained detailed projections and partnership frameworks, was that compromised too. I want to know who had access to the Frankfurt proposal. I want to know everyone who touched those files, everyone who saw those numbers, everyone who could have possibly transmitted that information outside this company. And I want that information by end of day. Calloway paused, her gaze sweeping the room like a searchlight looking for guilt. Let me be absolutely clear. Corporate espionage is not a mistake. It's not an oversight. It's a deliberate betrayal of trust. And I will find whoever is responsible. When I do, they will be terminated, prosecuted, and blacklisted from this industry permanently. Are there any questions? No one spoke. No one even seemed to breathe. Good. Get to work. The room emptied rapidly, people fleeing to their desks to start the audit to cover their tracks to ensure they weren't anywhere near the blast radius of Calloway's fury. Thatcher stayed frozen in his seat, his mind racing through implications. The European strategy he'd developed was that part of the leak. Had his work somehow contributed to this disaster? Mr. Morrison? He looked up to find Calloway standing beside his chair, her expression still granite hard but her voice slightly softer. Walk with me. It wasn't a request. Thatcher followed her out of the conference room, down the hallway into the elevator that carried them up to the 43rd floor in silence. Her office felt different today, not welcoming exactly, but less hostile than the conference room's accusatory atmosphere. Calloway closed the door behind them and turned to face him. Your European analysis is not part of the leak. That project remains internal and confidential. Thatcher exhaled relief he didn't realize he'd been holding. Thank God. However, Calloway moved to her desk, pulled up something on her computer. You had access to the Frankfurt proposal as part of your research. You reviewed those numbers 2 weeks ago when you were developing your market assessment. Cold understanding washed over him. You think I leaked it? No. Calloway said it firmly without hesitation. If I thought you were responsible, we wouldn't be having this conversation. You'd be talking to lawyers. But other people might make that connection, might point out that you're new to this level of responsibility, that you have financial pressures that could create motive, that you were one of the last people to access those files before the leak. I didn't. I know you didn't. Calloway held up a hand. I'm not accusing you. I'm warning you. When the investigation starts digging into access logs and file histories, your name will appear. People will ask questions. I need you to be prepared for that scrutiny. Thatcher sank into one of the precisely angled chairs, his mind spinning. What should I do? Tell the truth. Cooperate fully. Don't panic. Don't hide anything. Don't give anyone reason to doubt your integrity. Calloway sat across from him, her posture perfect, her expression serious. And trust that I know you didn't do this. Why? The question escaped before Thatcher could stop it. Why do you trust me? You barely know me. We've had, 3 actual conversations? Calloway was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tapping once against the armrest in that rare gesture of uncertainty. "Because when you witnessed something deeply private about me, you protected that information instead of exploiting it. That tells me more about your character than any background check or performance review ever could. You had leverage and you chose integrity. That's not the profile of someone who sells corporate secrets for profit." Her faith in him felt both reassuring and terrifying. "What if the investigation doesn't see it that way?" "Then I'll make them see it." Calloway's voice hardened with determination. "You're under my protection, Mr. Morrison. No one touches you without going through me first." The weight of that promise settled over Thatcher like armor he didn't know he needed. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. This investigation is going to be invasive and unpleasant. They'll examine your finances, your communications, your personal life. They'll interview your colleagues, your friends, possibly even your daughter's school. Are you prepared for that?" Thatcher thought about Bryn, about Mrs. Winters, about the carefully balanced life he'd built from the wreckage of loss. "I don't have a choice, do I?" "No, but you have my support. That counts for something." She said it with such certainty that Thatcher almost believed her, almost believed that Calloway Hayes's protection could shield him from whatever storm was coming. The investigation began that afternoon with the kind of systematic efficiency that made Thatcher feel like he was being dissected. IT pulled his computer access logs. Security reviewed his badge swipes. HR scheduled an interview for Wednesday morning that sounded voluntary but definitely wasn't. And through it all, Thatcher maintained his normal routine, worked on the European strategy, attended meetings, answered emails, picked up Bryn from school, helped her with homework, made dinner, read bedtime stories, like his entire professional life wasn't being examined under a microscope. On Wednesday, he sat across from two investigators in a windowless conference room and answered questions about his finances, his file access patterns, his relationships with competitors, his communication methods. They were polite but relentless, asking the same questions in different ways, looking for inconsistencies, treating him with the kind of professional courtesy that barely masked their suspicion. "Mr. Morrison, can you explain why you accessed the Frankfurt proposal files outside of normal business hours?" "I was working late on the European analysis. Ms. Hayes had given me a tight deadline. At 2 a.m. on a Saturday. I have a 6-year-old daughter. I work when she's asleep." "That must be difficult. Financially, I mean. Single-parent childcare costs medical expenses from your late wife's illness." Thatcher's hands clenched under the table. "I manage. But you could use more money. Anyone in your situation would." "I'm not anyone in my situation. I'm someone who works for what I earn and doesn't sell corporate secrets for profit." The investigator smiled without warmth. "Of course, we're just trying to understand the full picture." The interview lasted 2 hours and left Thatcher feeling scraped raw. When it finally ended, he returned to his desk to find Garrett hovering nervously. "How bad was it?" "Degrading." Thatcher slumped into his chair. "They think I'm desperate enough to commit corporate espionage because I work late and have childcare expenses." "Jesus." Garrett glanced around to make sure no one was listening. "For what it's worth, I told them you're not the type, that you're probably the most honest person in this building." "Thanks, I think." "Yeah, well, honesty doesn't pay great, but it's better than prison." Garrett squeezed his shoulder with awkward affection. "Hang in there, Morrison. They'll figure out you didn't do it." But as the days passed and the investigation ground forward, Thatcher wasn't so sure. His name kept appearing in reports. People started avoiding him in the hallways, afraid that association might contaminate them. Even Mrs. Winters looked at him with worried eyes when he picked up Bryn, like she was wondering if she should still trust him with her apartment key. The only person who didn't treat him like a potential criminal was Calloway Hayes. She continued their Friday meetings without interruption, reviewed his European strategy updates with the same sharp attention, never once suggested she doubted him. And when Thatcher showed up to their 4th weekly meeting looking like he hadn't slept in days, because he hadn't, she did something completely unexpected. She ordered him to sit down, then called her assistant. "Rachel, I need 2 coffees from the cafe downstairs. Real coffee, not the break room sludge. And whatever pastries they have that look decent." She hung up and fixed Thatcher with a look that was almost gentle. "You're running on fumes. When did you last eat something that wasn't coffee?" "Yesterday. Maybe." Thatcher tried to remember. "Bryn had chicken nuggets." "What did you have?" "Also chicken nuggets." Calloway's expression suggested this answer didn't surprise her but did disappoint her. "You can't take care of your daughter if you're collapsing from exhaustion and malnutrition." "I'm fine." "You're a terrible liar, Mr. Morrison." The coffee and pastries arrived with miraculous speed. Apparently, when Calloway Hayes ordered something, the universe complied quickly. She pushed a chocolate croissant across the desk toward him. "Eat." "That's not a suggestion." Thatcher ate because arguing seemed harder than compliance. The croissant was better than anything he'd had in weeks, rich and buttery, and completely at odds with the sterile anxiety of the investigation. Calloway watched him with that same assessing expression, like she was cataloging his deterioration and filing it under problems that needed solving. "The investigation is closing in on the actual leak. They've identified 3 employees with both access and suspicious financial activity. You're not one of them." Relief hit Thatcher so hard he felt lightheaded. "When will they announce that?" "Soon. Maybe next week. But I wanted you to know now before you worked yourself into an actual breakdown." "I wasn't." "You absolutely were." Calloway's tone was matter-of-fact. "I recognize the signs. I've been there. The sleepless nights, the constant anxiety, the feeling that you're one mistake away from losing everything you've fought to build. It's exhausting and it's unsustainable, and eventually something breaks." She said it with the kind of certainty that came from personal experience, and Thatcher wondered what had broken for her. What moment of vulnerability had taught her to recognize those same patterns in other people? "How did you get through it?" Calloway was silent for a long moment, staring at her coffee like it held answers she wasn't sure she wanted to share. "I didn't really. I just survived it. Built bigger walls, worked harder. Convinced myself that if I was perfect enough, untouchable enough, it would never happen again." She looked up, met his eyes. "But that's not healthy, and it's not sustainable, and I wouldn't recommend it as a strategy." "What would you recommend?" "Let people help you. Accept support. Don't try to carry everything alone." She paused. "And eat actual meals occasionally, not just your daughter's leftover chicken nuggets." Despite everything, Thatcher laughed. It felt good, like releasing pressure from a valve that had been sealed too tight for too long. "I'll work on that." "See that you do. I need you functional for the European expansion, not collapsed from malnutrition and stress." It should have sounded cold, reducing his well-being to corporate utility. But coming from Calloway, from someone who understood the cost of isolation, it sounded almost like caring disguised as practicality. The announcement came on a Tuesday morning, delivered through a company-wide email that managed to be both thorough and deliberately vague. 3 employees had been terminated for corporate espionage and theft of proprietary information. Criminal charges were pending. The investigation was closed. Aldridge Global thanked everyone for their cooperation and patience during this difficult period. Thatcher read the email 3 times, waiting for relief that came slowly and incompletely. He wasn't named, he wasn't implicated, he was technically cleared, but the past 2 weeks had left marks that a simple email couldn't erase. The way colleagues still avoided eye contact in the hallways, the knowledge that his entire life had been examined and judged, the exhaustion that had settled into his bones like concrete. Garrett appeared at his desk within minutes, looking genuinely happy for the first time in weeks. "See, I told you they'd figure it out. You're in the clear, Morrison." "Yeah." Thatcher managed a smile that felt like it belonged to someone else. "In the clear. You don't look happy about it." "I am. Thatcher gestured helplessly at his computer at the office, at the life he'd almost lost. "It's been a lot. I know. But it's over now." Garrett clapped him on the shoulder with awkward affection. "Take the win, man. You survived Calloway Hayes' investigation without getting fired or indicted. That's basically a superpower." Thatcher thought about Calloway ordering him to eat pastries about her admission that she'd built walls instead of accepting help about the way she'd said, "You matter beyond your productivity," like it was a truth she'd had to learn the hard way. She wasn't as bad as everyone thinks. Garrett raised his eyebrows. Hayes, the woman who once made a VP cry during a budget meeting. Maybe he deserved to cry, maybe he was incompetent. Or maybe she's terrifying and you've developed Stockholm Syndrome from your weekly meetings. But Garrett said it without real conviction, like he was starting to suspect that Thatcher might be seeing something he'd missed. That afternoon, Calloway called Thatcher to her office, not via Rachel this time, but with a direct text message that felt both more intimate and more urgent. "Need to see you. 3 p.m. Bring updated European framework." When Thatcher arrived, he found Calloway standing at her windows again, backlit by afternoon sun that turned the city into a sprawl of light and shadow. "Mr. Morrison." She turned to face him, and something in her expression had changed. Not softer exactly, but less defended. "I assume you saw the announcement." "Yes, and I'm grateful. For your support during the investigation, for believing me when other people didn't, for everything. You handled yourself well. A lot of people would have cracked under that kind of pressure." Calloway moved to her desk, gestured for him to sit. "The European strategy, I want to accelerate the timeline. The Frankfurt contract loss created an opening we can exploit if we move quickly. Can you have the implementation plan ready by end of next week instead of end of month?" Thatcher's mind raced through calculations, deadlines, the work that would require. "That's cutting it close. I'd need to dedicate most of my time to this project, which means other responsibilities would have to be reassigned." "Already done. I spoke with Mr. Sullivan this morning. For the next 2 weeks, your only priority is the European expansion. Everything else gets redistributed." It was exactly the kind of opportunity Thatcher had been working toward. Full ownership of a high-visibility project, direct collaboration with the CEO, a chance to prove his strategic value beyond number crunching. But it also meant longer hours, more pressure, less time with Bryn. "I can do it, but I'll need flexibility on working hours. Mornings and evenings are complicated with childcare. Work whatever hours you need to work. I don't care if you're productive at 3 a.m. or 3 p.m. as long as the work gets done." Calloway opened her portfolio, made a note. "If you need resources, research assistance, data analysis, whatever, submit the request to Rachel. This project has priority allocation." She said it so matter-of-factly, like completely restructuring his workload and giving him unlimited resources was normal executive behavior. But Thatcher knew better. This was trust. This was investment. This was Calloway Hayes betting on him in a way that could either accelerate his career or destroy it if he failed. "I won't let you down." "I know you won't." Calloway looked up from her notes, and something in her expression softened. "How's your daughter? The bruise from her fall?" The question caught Thatcher off guard, this intrusion of personal concern into professional territory. "Completely healed. She barely remembers it happened." "Good. Children are resilient that way." Calloway was quiet for a moment, her fingers tapping that nervous rhythm against her desk. "My mother used to say that children heal faster than adults because they haven't learned to hold on to pain yet. They feel it fully, then let it go." It was the second time she'd mentioned her mother, and both times her voice had carried the weight of old grief that never quite faded. "That's a beautiful way to think about it. My mother was a beautiful person, before the cancer." Calloway's expression went distant, like she was looking at memories instead of the present. She believed in living fully, being present, not letting fear dictate choices. And then she got sick and all those beliefs just evaporated. She spent her last year being afraid of everything. Afraid of pain, afraid of treatment, afraid of leaving me and my father alone. The fear consumed her faster than the cancer did. Thatcher felt his throat tighten with recognition. Margot was angry at the end. Furious at her body for betraying her, at me for being healthy, at the world for continuing without her. She tried to hide it, but I could see it burning underneath everything else. "Did it make you angry too?" "Yes." The admission came easier than it should have. I was angry at her for being sick, at myself for being angry at every doctor who couldn't fix her, at every couple who got to grow old together while we were planning her funeral. I'm still angry sometimes, at random moments when Bryn does something Margot would have loved to see. When I can't braid her hair right. When I'm eating chicken nuggets at midnight because I forgot to feed myself again. Calloway's expression shifted into something that looked almost like understanding. Anger is easier than grief. It gives you something to do with the pain. What do you do with yours? The question was too personal, too direct, crossing every professional boundary they'd carefully maintained. But Calloway didn't look offended. If anything, she looked relieved that someone had finally asked. I work 16-hour days, weekends, holidays. I build things and fix things and make things more efficient. I turn emotional energy into corporate achievement because at least that produces measurable results. Does it work? No. Calloway smiled without humor. But it looks productive from the outside, and that's apparently enough for most people. Thatcher thought about the rumors about Calloway Hayes, the ice queen who fired people for leaving early, who never took vacations, who valued profit over humanity. And he realized that everyone had mistaken survival strategy for character flaw, had judged her walls without understanding why she'd built them. You know you don't have to do that forever, right? The working yourself to death thing, it's not actually mandatory, says the man who works at 2 a.m. on Saturdays. That's different. I work late because I have to balance being a single parent with career advancement. You work late because you're running from something you've never let yourself feel. It was too honest, too confrontational. Exactly the kind of thing you didn't say to your CEO unless you wanted to get fired. Thatcher braced himself for fury, for the walls to slam back into place, for this fragile understanding to shatter under the weight of truth neither of them could take back. Instead, Calloway laughed, sharp and surprised and almost painful. You're right. That's exactly what I'm doing. And it's exhausting, and it's unsustainable. And I have no idea how to stop, because stopping means feeling everything I've spent 3 years avoiding. So don't stop all at once. Just take one evening off, one weekend, one moment where you're not CEO Calloway Hayes, who has to be perfect and untouchable, and you're just a person who survived cancer and lost her mother too young and deserves to rest. Calloway was quiet for a long time, studying him with those penetrating eyes that seemed to see straight through whatever masks people wore. Thatcher held her gaze, refusing to look away, refusing to apologize for caring about whether she destroyed herself through overwork. You're very presumptuous, Mr. Morrison. I know. It's a character flaw, or possibly a strength. Calloway stood, moved back to her windows with restless energy. I have a fundraiser this Saturday. Cancer research benefit. Black tie corporate networking. The kind of event where everyone performs concern without actually caring about the cause. I'm supposed to give a speech about innovation in medical treatment. Sounds miserable. It is. Calloway turned to face him, and there was something vulnerable in her expression. Would you come with me as my guest? Not romantically, just as someone who understands what these events cost. What it's like to smile and make small talk and pretend you're not thinking about hospital rooms and chemotherapy and everything you've lost. It was the most honest admission of need Thatcher had ever heard from her. This acknowledgement that she was tired of performing strength alone. And despite every logical reason to decline the professional complications, the time away from Bryn, the danger of getting more entangled in Calloway Hayes's complicated life. Thatcher found himself nodding. Okay, yes, I'll come. You'll need a tuxedo. I have one. From Margot's work events. It might be slightly outdated. I'm sure it's fine. Calloway's relief was visible, her shoulders dropping slightly. The event starts at 7. I can send a car for you at 6:15. I'll need to arrange childcare for Bryn. Of course. If that's complicated, the company has a list of vetted caregivers we use for employee emergencies. It should have felt strange making these arrangements with his CEO, like they were planning a date instead of a professional obligation. But somehow it just felt natural. Two people who understood each other's damage agreeing to face something difficult together. Saturday at 6:15. I'll be ready. Saturday arrived with unseasonable sunshine that felt almost mocking in its cheerfulness. Thatcher spent the morning with Bryn doing normal weekend things. Pancakes that turned out slightly burnt, a trip to the park where she insisted on crossing the monkey bars again despite his protests, lunch at the corner diner where she ordered grilled cheese and told the waitress an elaborate story about a fairy who lived in their building's heating vents. At 4 p.m., Mrs. Winters arrived with her knitting bag and a knowing smile that suggested she understood more than Thatcher had told her about tonight's plans. "You look nervous. It's just a work event, isn't it? It's a fundraiser for cancer research." Mrs. Winters's expression softened with understanding. She'd been the one who'd brought casseroles during Margot's final weeks, who'd watched Bryn during the funeral, who'd never once asked uncomfortable questions about grief or moving on. "Then it's good you're going. Good you're not hiding from it anymore." She settled onto the couch, already pulling out her knitting. "Go get ready. Bryn and I will be fine." Thatcher retreated to his bedroom and stared at the tuxedo he hadn't worn since Margot's last work gala, the one she'd insisted on attending, even though the chemotherapy had left her too weak to stand for more than 20 minutes at a time. He remembered holding her up on the dance floor pretending they were swaying to music instead of him supporting her weight while she smiled and laughed and refused to let cancer steal one more moment from their life. The tuxedo still fit, though it felt like wearing someone else's skin, like stepping back into a version of himself that had existed before loss had rewritten everything he thought he knew about survival. Bryn appeared in the doorway wearing her pajamas even though it was barely evening, her hair damp from the bath Mrs. Winters had apparently already orchestrated. "Daddy, you look fancy. Are you going to a ball like in Cinderella?" "Sort of. It's a work event with my boss." "The castle lady." Bryn climbed onto his bed, settling in like she planned to stay. "The scary one who's not really scary. What makes you think she's not scary? You smile sometimes when you talk about her, like you're worried and happy at the same time. 6 years old and already reading him better than most adults could." Thatcher sat down beside her, pulled her close. "She's been through a lot, like we have. Sometimes people build walls to protect themselves when they've been hurt. Like castles. Exactly like castles. But castles are lonely. That's why in stories the prince visits, so the princess isn't alone anymore." Bryn looked up at him with Margot's green eyes wise beyond her years. "Is she still lonely?" "I think she's less lonely than she used to be, but it takes time to learn how to let people in. You should tell her everyone needs a fairy to protect their castle, like Shimmerwings protects mine." The car arrived at exactly 6:15, a sleek black sedan, with a driver who opened the door without speaking. Thatcher kissed Bryn goodnight, received final instructions from Mrs. Winters about bedtime and emergency contacts, and slid into leather seats that probably cost more than his monthly rent. The Art Institute rose against the evening sky like a monument to wealth and culture, all marble columns and soaring ceilings, and the kind of understated elegance that screamed money without being obvious about it. Thatcher followed the flow of formal wear through galleries hung with priceless art, trying not to feel like an imposter among people whose watch collections probably exceeded his annual salary. He found Calloway in the main gallery standing alone despite being surrounded by people. Her isolation was somehow more pronounced than if she'd been actually by herself. She wore a deep blue gown that was elegant without being flashy, her hair down for once instead of pulled back, and she looked beautiful and untouchable and profoundly lonely. Their eyes met across the crowd, and something in her expression shifted. Relief, maybe. Or gratitude. Or just recognition that she was no longer quite so alone in performing this exhausting charade. Thatcher made his way through the glittering assembly to her side. "Ms. Hayes." "Mr. Morrison." A small smile touched her lips. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for the invitation." He glanced around at the gathering. "This is quite a crowd. Guilt and tax deductions make excellent motivators for philanthropy." Calloway's voice was dry. "Half these people are here because they lost someone to cancer. The other half are here because their accountants told them to donate to something. Which half are you?" "Both." I lost my mother. I survived my own diagnosis. And I have excellent tax advisors. Someone approached a silver-haired man in an expensive tuxedo who greeted Calloway with the kind of false warmth that meant he wanted something. Thatcher stepped back slightly, giving them space, but Calloway's hand shot out and caught his wrist. "Richard, this is Thatcher Morrison, one of our strategic analysts. Thatcher, this is Richard Aldridge. He founded the company my current position occasionally allows me to tolerate." Richard's eyebrows rose at the introduction, both at being called by his first name and at Calloway's unusual humor. Thatcher extended his hand, received a firm shake that lasted exactly the right amount of time. "Morrison, good to meet you. Hayes speaks highly of your European market analysis." "I appreciate that, sir." They made small talk for exactly 3 minutes before Richard excused himself with a promise to discuss something at the next board meeting. The moment he was gone, Calloway's shoulders relaxed fractionally. "Thank you for staying. Most people flee when Richard corners them. You grabbed my wrist. Fleeing seemed rude. I grabbed your wrist because I didn't want to be alone with him. He means well, but he has a tendency to reminisce about the company's founding for 45 minutes without pausing for breath." Calloway accepted a champagne flute from a passing server but didn't drink it. "How's Bryn?" "The monkey bars didn't claim another victim today. She conquered them, triumphantly, then told me in great detail about the fairy who lives in our heating vents and grants wishes if you leave her shiny buttons." "That sounds very specific." Bryn's imagination operates at a level I stopped trying to understand around age 4. They moved through the fundraiser together, Calloway handling business conversations while Thatcher provided silent support and occasional strategic intervention. He watched her perform the role of CEO, charming when necessary, ruthless when appropriate, always calculating 3 moves ahead. But he also noticed the moments when her smile went tight with pain, when her hand trembled slightly, holding the champagne she never drank when her eyes found his across the room like an anchor in a storm. At 8 p.m., Calloway was called to give her speech. She walked to the small stage with perfect posture, took the microphone with steady hands and delivered prepared remarks about innovation in cancer treatment and the importance of research funding and Aldridge Global's commitment to supporting medical advancement. It was professional, polished, completely appropriate for the audience and occasion. It was also completely hollow, the words of someone performing concern instead of feeling it. And then something shifted. Thatcher saw it happen in real time. Calloway paused, mid-sentence, looked out at the crowd of people performing their own versions of caring, and made a decision that he watched transform her expression from corporate mask to raw humanity. "I had a double mastectomy 2 years ago." Her voice cut through the polite murmur of the crowd like a blade. "Preventive surgery based on genetic testing that showed I had an 87% chance of developing breast cancer within the next decade. My mother died of breast cancer when I was 7. My aunt died of it at 42. The odds were not in my favor." The gallery went absolutely silent. Thatcher's heart hammered as he watched Calloway strip away years of carefully maintained privacy in front of hundreds of people. "I chose not to disclose my medical history publicly. Not because I was ashamed, but because I didn't want it to define me. I didn't want to be the CEO who survived cancer instead of just the CEO. I wanted my work to speak for itself without being filtered through assumptions about my health or my mortality." She paused, and her eyes found Thatcher's in the crowd, drew strength from whatever she saw there. But silence has its own cost, because pretending to be invulnerable means isolating yourself from the support you actually need. It means building walls so high that no one can see you're struggling. It means surviving at the expense of actually living. Calloway's voice softened but grew more intense. "My mother tried to survive alone. She built walls around her fear and her pain, and those walls killed her almost as surely as the cancer did. I don't want that to be my story. I don't want that to be anyone's story." She set down the microphone and walked off the stage, not waiting for applause, not performing grace or strength or any of the things the crowd expected, just being honest and raw and profoundly brave. The gallery erupted into applause that sounded genuine for the first time all evening. Thatcher met her at the edge of the crowd as board members and donors surged forward, wanting to talk to praise, to insert themselves into this moment of vulnerability. Calloway's hands were shaking, her face pale, her armor completely gone. "I need to leave, now, before I have to talk to anyone about what I just did." "Okay." Thatcher didn't question it, didn't suggest she stay and accept praise. He just offered his arm and walked with her through the gallery, through the crowd that parted around them, out into the cool Chicago night. The car was waiting, but Calloway walked past it, kept walking down Michigan Avenue with her heels clicking on the sidewalk and her gown trailing behind her like she was fleeing a fairy tale gone wrong. Thatcher followed, gave the driver a gesture that meant wait or leave, and caught up with Calloway 2 blocks later, where she'd stopped in front of a closed storefront, breathing hard, one hand pressed against the glass like she needed physical support to stay upright. "I can't believe I just did that. I just told 300 people about my medical history, about my family, about my walls." Her voice was sharp with something between panic and exhilaration. "What was I thinking?" "You were thinking it was time to stop performing and start being honest." "Honest?" Calloway laughed, the sound brittle. "Honesty is dangerous. Honesty gives people leverage. Honesty makes you weak. Or it makes you human." Thatcher stepped closer, not touching, but present. "You weren't weak up there. You were the bravest person in that room." I was terrified. "Bravery is doing the thing that terrifies you anyway." He paused. "For what it's worth, your mother would have been proud of you." Calloway's face crumpled just for a second, just enough for Thatcher to see the grief she'd been holding back for 20 years. Then she pulled herself together with visible effort, rebuilt the walls she'd just demolished. "We should go back. People will wonder where I went." Or we could not go back. We could get terrible diner food and talk about anything except cancer and corporate strategy and all the walls we've built. Calloway stared at him like he'd suggested something scandalous instead of simply human. "You're supposed to be at home with your daughter. Mrs. Winters is with her until midnight. She's fine. You're wearing a tuxedo. Terrible diner food tastes better in formal wear. It's a scientific fact." Despite everything, Calloway smiled. Genuinely smiled, without performing or calculating or protecting herself. "Okay. Yes. Let's get terrible diner food." They found an all-night diner 6 blocks away, the kind of place where the coffee was always hot and the waitress called everyone honey and the booths had duct tape holding the vinyl together. Thatcher ordered waffles. Calloway ordered coffee and toast, then stole half his waffles while insisting she wasn't hungry. And they talked. Not about work. Not about cancer. Not about any of the heavy things that had brought them to this moment. They talked about Bryn's elaborate fairy stories and Calloway's terrible cooking skills, and the year Thatcher tried to learn guitar and gave up after 3 lessons. They talked about favorite movies and books they'd read too many times, and the specific kind of exhaustion that came from pretending to have everything together when your life was held together with hope and duct tape. "I haven't done this in years," Calloway admitted around her 3rd cup of coffee. "Just sat somewhere and talked about nothing important with someone who didn't want anything from me." "Everyone wants something from you." "Yes, usually my money or my connections or my approval." She looked at him seriously. "What do you want, Thatcher?" It was the first time she'd used his first name, and the intimacy of it felt momentous. Thatcher considered the question honestly pushed past the easy answers about career advancement or job security. "I want you to remember how to be human instead of perfect. I want you to take weekends off occasionally and eat actual meals and maybe let someone care about you without treating it like a corporate negotiation." That's a tall order. "So start small. Take tomorrow off. Sleep past 6 a.m. Eat breakfast that isn't coffee and anxiety." Calloway smiled into her coffee cup. "I'll consider it." "That's politician speak for no. It's CEO speak for maybe." She set down her cup, met his eyes. "Thank you for coming tonight, for staying when I ran, for not treating my breakdown like a crisis that needed managing." "That wasn't a breakdown. That was honesty. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Because from inside it, they feel remarkably similar." Thatcher thought about the months after Margot died, crying in grocery stores, falling apart during parent-teacher conferences, forgetting how to function like a normal human being. About the slow, painful process of remembering that falling apart didn't mean staying broken. Breakdown means you shatter and can't be put back together. Honesty means you admit you've been broken all along and you're tired of pretending otherwise. One is an ending, the other is a beginning. Calloway was quiet for a long moment, processing this distinction like it was a business strategy she needed to understand fully before implementing. I don't know how to have beginnings anymore. I only know how to survive endings. Then maybe it's time to learn something new. With your help. The question hung between them, weighted with implications neither of them were quite ready to acknowledge. This wasn't just about professional mentorship or friendly support. This was about two people who'd survived catastrophic loss, recognizing each other across the wasteland and deciding that maybe, just maybe, survival didn't have to mean isolation. With my help, if you want it. Calloway's smile was small and genuine and heartbreakingly vulnerable. I want it. They left the diner near midnight, walked back to where the car was still waiting with the patient driver, who didn't comment on their 3-hour absence. Calloway dropped Thatcher at his apartment with a quiet goodnight and a reminder about their Friday meeting. But as Thatcher walked up to his door, his phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Thank you for tonight. For the honesty and the terrible waffles and the reminder that being human is allowed. C. Thatcher saved the number, typed back. Anytime. That's what castle visitors are for. The response came immediately. I'm glad you're visiting mine. Monday morning brought consequences that Thatcher should have anticipated, but somehow hadn't. Calloway's speech at the fundraiser had gone viral over the weekend, not in the messy, scandal-driven way that destroyed careers, but in the powerful human interest way that made people see corporate leaders as actual people. News outlets were calling it brave. Social media was calling it inspiring. The board of directors was calling emergency meetings to discuss how this personal disclosure might affect shareholder confidence. Garrett intercepted Thatcher the moment he stepped off the elevator. Emergency meeting. Conference room B. Hayes called it for 8 sharp. What happened? The speech happened, it's everywhere, and the board is not happy. Thatcher's stomach clenched with guilt. He'd encouraged her to be honest, to stop performing strength, and now that honesty was being weaponized against her by people who valued profit margins over humanity. The conference room felt different this time, less like a business meeting and more like a trial. Senior staff filled the seats, their expressions ranging from worried to carefully neutral. Calloway stood at the windows, her back to the room, her posture rigid. When she turned to face them, her expression was pure ice. I assume you've all seen the coverage of Saturday's fundraiser. I assume you're aware that the board has called an emergency session to discuss my fitness for leadership, and I assume some of you are wondering whether my public disclosure compromises my ability to lead this company effectively. No one spoke. The silence was suffocating. Let me be clear. My medical history is my own. My choice to share it publicly was calculated and deliberate. And if any of you believe that honesty about personal struggles disqualifies someone from corporate leadership, I invite you to submit your concerns through proper channels. Calloway's gaze swept the room, daring anyone to challenge her. In the meantime, we have work to do. The European expansion launches in 6 weeks. I expect everyone's full focus and commitment. Are there any questions? Still no one spoke. Good. Get to work. The room emptied rapidly, people fleeing to their desks to process what they'd just witnessed. Thatcher stayed in his seat, waiting until they were alone. Calloway looked at him with an expression that might have been gratitude or exhaustion, or both. Walk with me. They took the elevator to the 43rd floor in silence. In her office, with the door closed and the city sprawling below them, Calloway finally let her armor crack. The board is circling. Richard called me at 6 a.m. They're questioning my judgment, my stability, whether personal disclosure compromises my objectivity. That's ridiculous. Is it? I just handed them ammunition, showed weakness, proved I'm human instead of the machine they hired to generate revenue. Calloway's voice was bitter. They didn't hire me to be vulnerable. They hired me to be perfect. Then they hired wrong, because perfection is a performance, not a reality. Thatcher moved closer to her desk. You gave an honest speech about surviving cancer. That doesn't make you unstable. It makes you brave. The board doesn't care about bravery. They care about stock prices and quarterly projections and whether leadership appears stable. So we prove you're the most stable, competent, visionary leader they could possibly have. Thatcher's mind was already racing through strategies. The European expansion. That's your proof. Revolutionary market entry strategy projected $300 million in revenue over 5 years, partnerships that position Aldridge Global as industry leader. We accelerate the timeline present to the board this week, show them exactly why replacing you would be catastrophic for company value. Calloway stared at him like he'd just proposed something simultaneously brilliant and insane. The implementation plan isn't ready. We're still missing key partnership agreements, final risk assessments. Then we finish them. Now. Today. Thatcher pulled out his laptop, opened the project files. You said I could have unlimited resources. I'm requesting them. Pull every analyst we need, every legal expert, every partnership coordinator. We work around the clock if necessary, but we deliver a presentation so flawless that the board has no choice but to recognize your strategic brilliance. That's... Calloway stopped, something like hope flickering across her face. That's actually possible. Difficult, but possible. Difficult is what we do. Thatcher smiled, trying to channel confidence he didn't quite feel. You've been working impossible hours for years. I've been raising a child alone while building a career. Between the two of us, we can handle 1 week of intensive strategic planning. For a long moment, Calloway just looked at him with an expression that Thatcher couldn't quite read. Gratitude, maybe, or recognition, or something deeper that neither of them was ready to name. Okay, let's do it. Let's show them why honesty doesn't equal weakness. The next 72 hours blurred into a marathon of caffeine-fueled strategic planning that made Thatcher's previous workload look relaxed by comparison. Calloway cleared her schedule of everything except critical meetings. Thatcher mobilized a team of analysts, legal advisors, and partnership specialists. They commandeered a conference room on the 42nd floor and turned it into a war room plastered with market projections, partnership frameworks, and risk assessment matrices. Garrett appeared on day 2, looking concerned and impressed in equal measure. Morrison, what the hell is happening? You've pulled half the finance department into some kind of strategic black hole. You're living in that conference room. And rumor has it Calloway Hayes is personally overseeing whatever crisis this is. It's not a crisis. It's an opportunity. Thatcher didn't look up from the German manufacturing analysis he was reviewing. And I can't explain right now. I'm on deadline. Are you sleeping? Eating, remembering you have a daughter? That made Thatcher pause. Bryn. When had he last actually spent time with her instead of just managing logistics? Mrs. Winters had been watching her every evening. He'd been coming home after she was asleep, leaving before she woke up running on fumes and determination and the increasingly desperate need to prove that Calloway's honesty hadn't been a mistake. I'm handling it. But the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. You look like hell, which means you're not handling it. Garrett sat down across from him, lowered his voice. Whatever you're doing for Hayes, is it worth destroying yourself over? Thatcher thought about Calloway standing on that stage stripping away her armor, about the board circling her like predators, about what it would mean if she lost everything because she dared to be human instead of perfect. Yes, it is. Thursday evening, Thatcher was still in the war room at 8 p.m. when Calloway appeared in the doorway. You should go home. It's almost 8. Bryn needs you more than this presentation does. I can't. We're not finished. We're close enough. I can handle the final polish tonight. You need to be with your daughter. I thought we were in this together, partners fighting the board. We are. But partnership doesn't mean martyrdom. Calloway moved into the room, put her hand over his on the table in a gesture that was both professional and deeply personal. I know what it costs to sacrifice everything for career advancement. I've made that choice repeatedly, and every time I lost something I can never get back. Don't make my mistakes, Thatcher. Don't let work consume your relationship with Bryn. Says the woman who works 16-hour days. Exactly. I'm the cautionary tale, not the role model. Calloway squeezed his hand once, then released it. Go home. Read her bedtime stories. Be present for the childhood that's disappearing faster than you realize. This presentation will still be here tomorrow. Thatcher wanted to argue, wanted to insist he could handle both, wanted to prove he was strong enough to manage everything without choosing. But Calloway was right. Bryn was 6 years old, and someday she'd be 16 and wouldn't want bedtime stories anymore, and he'd have missed these years chasing corporate victories that would feel empty without her to share them with. Okay, I'll go home, but I'm back here at 6 a.m. to finish this. Deal. Friday morning, the board meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. Thatcher arrived at 6 as promised, found Calloway already there looking like she'd worked through the night and spent the next 8 hours putting final polish on a presentation that would either vindicate her honesty or prove the board right about vulnerability being weakness. At 1:30, they stood together in the empty conference room, reviewing slides one last time. This is good work, Thatcher. Exceptional work. Whatever happens today, I want you to know that. Whatever happens, you were right to be honest at that fundraiser, even if the board can't see it. Calloway turned to face him, her expression serious. If this goes badly, if they vote me out anyway, none of it is your fault. You gave me exactly what I needed. A reminder that being human doesn't disqualify you from leadership, that honesty has value beyond quarterly projections. It's not going badly. Thatcher held her gaze. Stop catastrophizing and trust yourself. You've got this. The board would be insane to remove you. At exactly 2 p.m., they entered the conference room on the 43rd floor. The setup was identical to the investigation announcement board members on one side, Calloway's presentation position on the other, the rest of them seated against the wall like spectators at a trial. Richard Aldridge called the meeting to order with perfunctory efficiency. Ms. Hayes, thank you for joining us. As you know, this board has some concerns about recent events and their potential impact on Aldridge Global's reputation and stability. We'd like to hear your perspective. Calloway stood with perfect posture, her expression giving nothing away. I appreciate the opportunity to address the board's concerns. However, before we discuss my personal disclosure at the Cancer Research Fundraiser, I'd like to present our strategic plan for European market expansion. I believe you'll find it directly addresses questions about my vision and leadership capabilities. Richard's eyebrows rose. Ms. Hayes, we're here to discuss my fitness for leadership, I understand. And the best way to demonstrate that fitness is to show you the results of strategic planning that will position Aldridge Global as the dominant force in European markets over the next 5 years. Calloway's voice was steel wrapped in silk. Unless the board would prefer to evaluate leadership based on personal medical history rather than business acumen. The challenge was unmistakable. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. Richard's mouth tightened, but he gestured for her to proceed. What followed was 45 minutes of strategic brilliance that made Thatcher's chest tight with pride and something dangerously close to awe. Calloway moved through the presentation with absolute command, anticipating questions before they were asked, demonstrating not just competence, but visionary thinking that transformed market analysis into compelling narrative. She explained how the Frankfurt contract loss had actually created opportunities for better partnerships, how the European expansion would generate $300 million in revenue while establishing Aldridge Global as an innovation leader, how every risk had been assessed and mitigated with contingency plans that bordered on prescient. And when challenged by hostile board members, particularly Vivian Blackwell, who seemed determined to find fault, Calloway defended her work with precision that left no room for argument. Ms. Hayes, you developed this strategy while making public disclosures about personal instability. Vivian's smile was sharp. Some might say that demonstrates poor judgment about priorities. Calloway's expression went glacial. I developed this strategy over the past month with my strategic analysis team, culminating in intensive preparation this week. My ability to do my job has never been compromised by my medical history, Ms. Blackwell. In fact, I'd argue that surviving cancer made me a better leader, more resilient, more focused, more capable of making difficult decisions under pressure. Or it made you emotionally volatile and prone to inappropriate personal disclosure. Some might say honest. Calloway didn't flinch. I spent years pretending to be perfect because that's what this board seemed to value, but perfection is a performance, not a reality, and I'd rather lead this company as a human being who acknowledges vulnerability than as a machine who prioritizes performance over integrity. Integrity doesn't pay dividends, Ms. Hayes. No, but vision does. Innovation does. Strategic brilliance does. Calloway gestured to the presentation still displayed behind her. I just showed you a plan that could triple our European market share and generate hundreds of millions in revenue. That's what pays dividends. Ms. Blackwell, not my willingness to perform in vulnerability for your comfort. The tension in the room was suffocating. Thatcher watched board members exchange glances, saw Richard making notes that could mean anything, felt his own heart hammering with the knowledge that this could still go either way. Then a younger board member, James something Thatcher didn't catch the last name, spoke up with what sounded like a genuine question rather than an attack. Ms. Hayes, I have a question about the partnership structure with the German manufacturers. You mentioned shared risk mitigation. Can you elaborate on how that protects Aldridge Global if market conditions shift? It was the shift they needed. Calloway's posture relaxed fractionally as she moved into detailed explanation of risk-sharing frameworks and contingency clauses. And slowly, painfully, the meeting transformed from interrogation to actual strategic discussion. 2 hours later, Richard called for a break. The board filed out to deliberate privately, leaving Calloway and the senior staff in awkward limbo. Thatcher wanted to go to her to tell her she'd been brilliant to offer support, but professional boundaries kept him in his seat while Calloway stood at the windows alone and untouchable, watching the city like she was already preparing for exile. 30 minutes felt like 30 years. When the board reconvened, Richard's expression was unreadable as he called the meeting back to order. Ms. Hayes, the board has discussed your presentation and your recent public disclosures. We have concerns about both. He paused, letting the tension build. However, we also recognize that your strategic vision and leadership have been instrumental in Aldridge Global's success. The European expansion plan you've presented demonstrates exactly the kind of innovative thinking that positions us for long-term growth. Calloway's face remained perfectly neutral, but Thatcher saw her hands clench behind her back. That said, moving forward, we expect more careful consideration of how personal disclosures might impact corporate reputation. Transparency is valuable, but it must be balanced with professional judgment. Mr. Aldridge, Calloway's voice was cold and clear. I need to be absolutely certain I understand the board's position. Are you asking me to resume performing in vulnerability, to hide personal struggles and medical history to protect corporate image? Richard shifted uncomfortably. We're asking for discretion. I gave a speech about surviving cancer at a cancer research fundraiser. That's not indiscretion. That's appropriate context. Calloway's eyes swept the room. And if this board believes that honesty about medical challenges compromises my ability to lead, then perhaps we need to have a more fundamental conversation about values. Ms. Hayes, no, let me be clear. Calloway's voice carried absolute authority. I will not apologize for being honest about my survival. I will not pretend that medical challenges don't exist. I will not perform perfect health to make shareholders comfortable. What I will do is continue delivering exceptional results, innovative strategy, and transformative leadership. If that's not sufficient for this board, then we should discuss transition planning now rather than wasting everyone's time. The room went deadly silent. Thatcher's heart stopped. This was it. Calloway was calling their bluff, forcing them to choose between losing an irreplaceable CEO or accepting that humanity and leadership could coexist. Richard looked around the table, reading faces, calculating political capital. Finally, he sighed. Ms. Hayes, no one is asking you to leave. The board recognizes your value to this organization. We're simply requesting that future personal disclosures be coordinated with communication strategy to minimize market volatility. That's acceptable. Calloway's expression softened fractionally. I have no intention of making regular public statements about my medical history. The fundraiser speech was a one-time response to feeling like dishonesty was consuming me. I don't anticipate repeating it. Good. Then let's discuss next steps for the European expansion. Richard actually smiled, small and grudging but genuine. The preliminary partnerships you've secured are impressive. We'd like to authorize moving forward with full implementation pending legal review of final contracts. Just like that, the crisis was over. The board approved the European strategy with overwhelming support. They discussed timeline, resource allocation, quarterly checkpoints. They treated Calloway like the competent CEO she'd always been. The meeting adjourned at 6 p.m. Board members filed out, making small talk about dinner plans and weekend golf games like they hadn't just spent 4 hours deciding whether to destroy someone's career. Calloway remained at the windows until they were gone, then turned to find Thatcher still sitting against the wall. "You're still here." "Of course I'm still here." Thatcher stood cross to her. "You were incredible. Brilliant and brave and absolutely perfect. I almost talked myself into getting fired. You stood up for integrity over performance. That took more courage than any corporate strategy ever could." Calloway's eyes were suspiciously bright. "I couldn't have done it without you. The presentation, the strategy, the reminder that being human is allowed, all of it. You gave me permission to stop performing." "You gave yourself permission. I just witnessed it." They stood together in the empty conference room, and Thatcher was intensely aware that they were alone for the first time since that charged moment in her office days ago. The thing they'd agreed to talk about after the board meeting. The complicated feelings neither of them had named, but both of them felt humming in the space between them. "We should talk." Calloway echoed his thoughts. "About what happens next. About us." "Us." Thatcher tested the word, found it both terrifying and right. "That's a complicated pronoun in our situation." "Very complicated. You work for me. Power dynamics, professional ethics, potential conflicts of interest. We covered this already. Excellent reasons why this is a terrible idea. So we should maintain professional boundaries." But Calloway said it without conviction, like she was reading lines she no longer believed. "Should we?" Thatcher stepped closer, close enough to see the exact way her breath caught. "Because I think we crossed those boundaries weeks ago. Maybe the day I saw your scars and you decided to trust me instead of fire me. Maybe during the investigation when you protected me without question. Maybe at the fundraiser when you let me see you terrified and I stayed anyway. This could destroy both our careers if it goes wrong. Or it could be the beginning of something that actually matters." Thatcher reached for her hand, laced their fingers together. "I'm not saying we rush into anything. I'm saying we stop pretending we don't feel this. That we acknowledge what's happening and figure out how to navigate it like adults." Calloway looked down at their joined hands, then back up at his face. "I don't know how to do this. Relationships, vulnerability, letting someone see me as more than just the CEO. I've spent so many years building walls that I'm not sure I remember how to build bridges." Then we learn together, slowly, carefully. No pressure, no expectations except honesty. Thatcher squeezed her hand gently. "You already showed me your scars, literal and metaphorical. That's the hardest part. Everything else is just details." "What about Bryn?" The question made Thatcher's chest tighten. "Have you thought about what it means to bring someone into her life who might not stay?" He had been avoiding thinking about it, focused on his own feelings without considering his daughter's emotional safety. Bryn had already lost one mother. Introducing her to someone who might not be permanent was a risk he'd sworn never to take. "You're right. Bryn has to be the priority, which means we take this even slower than I was thinking. Which means we're very, very careful about what this looks like and when she knows about it and how we protect her if things don't work out. That's responsible parenting. It's terrifying parenting." Thatcher's voice went soft. "But she's already asked about you, called you the castle lady, Said I should bring you for pizza night because everyone is less lonely with pizza. Calloway laughed, surprised and delighted. She sounds exactly like you described, wise and creative and absolutely certain about her opinions. She's the best thing I ever did, which is why I need to be sure about this before we go any further. I need to know that you're ready for what it means to be part of our life, that you understand it's not just me you'd be choosing. It's a package deal with a 6-year-old who has strong opinions about fairies and hates wearing socks and still cries sometimes about the mother she barely remembers. I would never want to replace Margot. I know, but Bryn might not understand that distinction. She might attach to you and then be devastated if we don't work out. I can't. Thatcher's throat tightened. I can't let her be hurt like that. Not again. Calloway pulled her hand free from his, and for a terrible moment Thatcher thought she was ending this before it started, but instead she framed his face with both hands, gentle and deliberate. Then we do this right. We take it slow. We keep it private until we're sure this is real and sustainable. We protect Bryn above everything else, including our own feelings. And we promise each other absolute honesty. If either of us has doubts if this stops working, we communicate immediately instead of letting it fester. That sounds reasonable and terrifying. Most good things are. Calloway smiled, small and genuine. I'm not promising this will be easy. I'm not even promising it will work. But I'm promising to try, to show up, to be honest, to choose presence over perfection. If you're willing to be patient with me while I figure out how. Thatcher thought about castle walls and the courage it took to open the gates, about Calloway standing on that stage stripping away her armor in front of hundreds of people, about second chances and choosing life over survival, and the terrifying beauty of letting someone see your damage and staying anyway. I'm willing. We both deserve this, the chance to choose something real instead of just functional, the possibility of connection that doesn't require performance. Then let's try. Calloway leaned forward, rested her forehead against his. Slowly, carefully, with pizza and fairy stories and all the complicated, messy human things that make life worth living. They stood like that for a long moment, not quite kissing, but intimate in a way that felt more significant than any physical contact. Two broken people who'd survived catastrophic loss, who'd built walls to protect themselves, who were choosing carefully, deliberately to risk vulnerability one more time. Finally, Calloway pulled back. You should go home. Bryn is waiting and you promised to be there for dinner. Come with me. Calloway's eyes went wide. What? Come have pizza with us. Not presenting you as anything except my friend from work. Bryn already knows about you. She wants to meet the castle lady. No pressure. Just pizza and probably some very elaborate fairy stories. Consider it research into whether you can handle the chaos of single-parent household dining. I don't... Calloway stopped. Took a breath, tried again. Okay. Yes. Pizza sounds good. But I should change first. This suit is not pizza appropriate. Meet me at my apartment in an hour. I'll text you the address. An hour. Okay. Dick Calloway looked simultaneously terrified and excited, like she was about to jump off a cliff and wasn't sure whether there was water at the bottom. Should I bring anything? Just yourself. And maybe lower your expectations about my cooking skills and apartment cleanliness. An hour later, Thatcher opened his door to find Calloway standing there in jeans and a sweater, her hair down her face, free of corporate armor. She looked beautiful and nervous and profoundly human. Hi, I brought cookies from the bakery near my apartment. I hope that's okay. I wasn't sure what 6-year-olds eat. Cookies are always okay. Come in. Calloway stepped into his small apartment, and Thatcher watched her take in the mismatched furniture and the fairy drawings covering the refrigerator and the general chaos of a life being lived instead of curated. Daddy, is that her? Bryn appeared in the hallway wearing her purple dress and bouncing with excitement. Is that the castle lady? Bryn, this is Ms. Hayes. She's my friend from work. Ms. Hayes, this is my daughter Bryn. But Calloway was already kneeling down to Bryn's level, her expression soft in a way Thatcher had never seen. Hi, Bryn. Your daddy has told me so much about you, and please call me Calloway. Calloway? Bryn tested the name. That's pretty. Like a princess name. Thank you. I like your dress. Purple is a very good color. It makes me look like a princess. Do you want to see my fairy drawings? They have sparkles because fairies should be magic, not boring. Calloway glanced up at Thatcher with something like helpless delight. I would love to see your fairy drawings. And just like that, Bryn grabbed Calloway's hand and dragged her toward the living room, chattering about fairies and unicorns and the puzzle with the kittens that she needed help finishing. Thatcher followed, watching Calloway, the terrifying CEO who made board members nervous, sitting cross-legged on his floor examining crayon drawings with the kind of serious attention most people reserved for important documents. This fairy is beautiful. What's her name? Shimmerwings. And she protects the castle from mean people who try to make the princess be boring. That's an important job. I know. Someone has to keep the sparkles safe. Bryn looked up at Calloway with absolute seriousness. My daddy said you have a castle with walls. Do you have a fairy too? Calloway's expression flickered with something complicated. I don't have a fairy. I've been protecting my castle all by myself. That's sad. Everyone needs a fairy. Bryn considered this problem with the gravity it deserved. You can share Shimmerwings if you want. She's good at protecting. Thatcher's throat went tight watching Calloway struggle not to cry at his daughter's casual kindness. She managed to smile instead, reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind Bryn's ear with unexpected tenderness. Thank you, Bryn. That's the nicest offer anyone's made me in a very long time. The pizza arrived and they ate at the kitchen table with Bryn providing running commentary on everything from school drama to the injustice of bedtime to her theory that broccoli was actually alien food disguised as vegetables. Calloway listened to all of it with genuine interest, asked questions that showed she was actually paying attention, and even contributed her own theory that Brussels sprouts were probably in league with the broccoli conspiracy. After dinner, Bryn insisted they finish the unicorn puzzle together. They sat on the living room floor, Thatcher, Calloway, and Bryn fitting pieces together, while Bryn narrated an elaborate story about the unicorns going on a space adventure to find magical stardust. And Thatcher watched Calloway haze the CEO, who commanded boardrooms and terrified competitors, completely absorbed in helping a 6-year-old find the piece that would complete the unicorn's horn. At 8:30, Thatcher announced bedtime. Bryn protested with the kind of passionate indignation that suggested she was genuinely tired but would never admit it. But Calloway hasn't heard the fairy story yet, the one about the enchanted forest. Maybe Calloway can come back another time to hear that story, Thatcher suggested carefully. Will you? Bryn turned to Calloway with pleading eyes. Will you come back for pizza again? Calloway glanced at Thatcher, reading permission in his expression. I would really like that, if your daddy says it's okay. It's definitely okay. Bryn declared, then threw her arms around Calloway in an impulsive hug that made the older woman freeze for just a second before carefully hugging back. I'm glad you're not lonely in your castle anymore. Me too, sweetheart. Me too. After Bryn was asleep, Calloway stood at the window looking at the city much smaller than the view from her office, but somehow more real. Your daughter is wonderful, wise and kind and absolutely certain about everything. You're doing an amazing job with her. Some days it feels like I'm barely holding it together. That's parenting. But she's happy, healthy, creative, compassionate, all the things that matter. Calloway turned to face him. Thank you for sharing her with me. I know that was a risk. She liked you. How do you feel about that? Terrified, honored, completely out of my depth. But also, Calloway's smile was genuine, unguarded. Happy in a way I haven't been in a very long time. Tonight was real. Not performance, not corporate strategy. Just people being human together. I'd forgotten what that felt like. Thatcher closed the distance between them, took her hands in his. So we keep doing this, slowly, carefully. Pizza nights and fairy stories and learning how to build bridges instead of walls. That sounds like a beginning. It is. Thatcher pulled her close, wrapped his arms around her. The kind where we choose to live instead of just survive, where we let ourselves be human instead of perfect. where we trust that maybe, just maybe, we deserve to be happy again. Calloway rested her head against his shoulder, and for the first time since he'd known her, she let herself be held without armor, without calculation, without fear. I want that. I want all of it. With you. With Bryn. With whatever messy, complicated, beautiful life we can build together. Then we'll build it. One pizza night at a time. They stood like that in the quiet of his small apartment, two people who'd survived catastrophic loss, who'd learned to hide their scars, who were choosing to risk vulnerability one more time. Outside, Chicago hummed with life. Inside, something new was beginning. Not perfect, not without fear or doubt or the ghosts of everything they'd lost, but real and present and full of possibility. Some scars heal in boardrooms, others heal over pizza. And sometimes, if you're lucky enough to find someone who understands both kinds of healing, you get to choose life over survival. You get to remember that being human is allowed. You get to build bridges instead of walls. You get to begin again.